Hello and welcome back to Redirecting. Now, there was a video shared with me where the president of Ghana had a speech when he went to France, and it was directed towards those in the African diaspora. Now, when you listen to the speech, what he's saying, a lot of it makes sense. But what I want to do is I want to further break down the speech, okay? Before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and roll the clip of the speech so that you can hear for yourself what he was talking about in this speech. And then I'm going to share my thoughts on what he had to say and just go more into it by breaking it down based on what I was able to hear in that speech. I'll be right back.
Diaspora of the African diaspora is intimately linked with what happens on the continent. And Africa strong and performing transforms your position and your status here in Europe. But an Africa which continues to live the narrative of poverty, hungry children, people going across the Sahara, going in rickety boats and dying in Lampedusa to get to Europe. That Africa is not a narrative that is going to help you over here. So I think between you and us, our main task is the transformation of the continent. And why do I say so? Just one simple example. The Chinese diaspora is supposed to be some 60 million people. And in the table of states, they constitute the 25th country in the world. They're saying that of the 52 billion foreign investment that went into China in the 80s and 90s that transformed China into what it is today, the manufacturing hub of the world, 50% of that, 26%, came from the Chinese overseas community. And that development of China that has taken place has changed the status and the position of Chinese all over the world. So I want you to take those statistics very seriously, because that is the transformative connection that we want to make with the African diaspora. How to implicate it in the development of the continent. Once we change the narrative about Africa, and we can only do it ourselves, we have to get away from the idea that there's some Father Christmas somewhere who's going to come and develop our continent for us. There is no such Father Christmas. There's just us who are going to be able to develop our continent. So, once that mentality is our mentality, that we have to do it ourselves, then our relations with other people become that much more structured and punctilious, if you like. Our relations with France, our relations with Europe. Our relations with Europe is a natural one. You look at the geography of the world, Africa and Europe are natural partners. There's just this small strip of water, the Mediterranean, that separates the two of us. So when you look at that, and you look also at the history that has gone on between Africa and Europe, that is a natural relationship and a natural alliance, but a relationship that has to be different from the relationship that we've had up to now. Why do I say so? That relationship has enriched Europe, but has not enriched Africa. So we need to change that dynamic. And we can only do it by ourselves taking the correct measures for our future. So that's where my focus is. And that's why I'm very excited about the possibility of having this encounter, that we can all begin to speak the same language, the language of cooperation, the language of collaboration, but to a different end. It cannot be right that the continent that has allegedly the wealthiest resources of all the continents of the world is also the home of the poorest people on the globe. That disconnect is not a good disconnect, and we need to work to change that disconnect. So when we're then talking about the need for self-reliance, It is because particularly important is to recognize that we have the resources, we have the youngest population in the world. 25% of our population is under the age of, 19. It's a huge amount of resource, of potential strength. And once we do the educating, we find the means to do the educating of this population and giving it skills, then we are putting Africa on a path of very, very strong economic growth. We can replicate what has been done in Asia if, like them, we maintain the discipline and the correct analysis of what we need to do to move our continent forward. But really, if they've been able in Asia in a generation to transform the lives of hundreds of millions of Chinese, hundreds of millions of Indians, why can we not replicate that same phenomenon on our continent? We can do it. And I have no doubt that those of you here can make a big input into that transformation that we're all looking for. And when we're saying this, and it's very important that we recognize that we're not saying we're turning our back on the world. No, we can't do that. We live on the same planet. We need the association and the partnership with countries like France, with the technologies that they have developed here, their savoir-faire in many, many areas. All those things are matters that we can profitably associate and benefit from. But all of it, always, from an understanding that it is for us to define the relationship that we want with the rest of the world. We shouldn't be caught up in a language or a narrative that says that we are appendages to other people's thinking, other people's policies, other people's volonté. That will not help us. So, Mr. President, we're saying the time has come for us to take our destiny in our own hands. It's now 6 decades since the independence movement swept Africa. And those who led it, did so on the understanding that independence would bring not just freedom as sovereign states, but would also provide us the base for the social and economic transformation of our countries. That still hasn't happened. But the pointers are all very, very positive towards the future. And there are several countries on the continent. I would get into a lot of trouble if I started identifying them here, as I should mention, and I won't mention anyone. But there are several on the continent that visibly you can see are on the right way forward for what we need to do. Well, in concluding, there's just one thing that I want to say to my brothers and my sisters of the African diaspora in this room. And that is something that perhaps when I hear the way in which there's a lot of concern about the status in France and barriers in France. But there's one thing that all of you should remember, and I hope that you will associate this with me. The destiny of all Black people in the world, wherever they are, is bound up with Africa. Let me repeat that. The destiny of all Black people in the world is bound up with Africa. And a performing Africa elevates the status of all Black people around the world. And non-performing Africa continues the situation where Black people around the world are looked at.
Okay, when I listen to the speech, I'm going to just share with you my thoughts. First of all, you have to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. Okay, that's the first thing I'm going to say. He talked about how the Chinese diaspora, how they have been able to, from the outside, pretty much build or rebuild China to make it a superpower. Okay? So, for me, that is an apple. And the orange is how he talked about the African diaspora should be able to do the same thing. And the reason why I think these are two different things, and you cannot use that to say that the African diaspora should do the same thing for the continent of Africa, is because there's a huge difference. China, the people of China, they run their own country. Okay? That's one difference. Okay, China is a country. Africa is a continent. But when you look at their numbers, their population numbers, okay, the population numbers may be similar, but again, the difference is the fact that the Chinese are running their country. Africans do not run the continent. So the Chinese feel confidence in reinvesting. Those in the Chinese diaspora, they feel confident in reinvesting in their country to improve living standards in their country and to make China a superpower because they are running things over there. Okay, now we do know that there are regions of China that are poor and poverty-stricken. We get that. But for the most part, China has risen itself to a superpower in the world. Now, to ask the African diaspora to do the same, you're saying, okay, to those of us here in the U.S., in the Caribbean, in Canada, in the U.K., and to the four corners of the world where we have been dispersed, you're saying that we could do the same thing. So you're basically telling the African diaspora to invest in Africa. Now, again, like I said, it sounds good on the surface. And to compare it to China, say, well, we can do what they did and build the continent to a superpower the same way. Because, yeah, he's right. There are a lot of resources on Africa. I do believe that Africa has the greatest resources on the planet. Land, resources, everything. But the issue with asking those in the diaspora to do what the Chinese diaspora did is the fact that, for the most part, the continent is still being ran by foreign powers. You have those from India, those from Europe, those from Asia that have a foothold and a stronghold on the continent. You have puppet leaders, African puppet leaders, who bend, twist, and jump to the every command of these foreign leaders. They are doing what they've been asked to do. You have a few that are stepping forward. Now, some of you will say that, well, what about this one and that one? You have to understand we're talking about a continent with dozens of countries. And not all of the presidents or the leaders of these countries are willing to go against the foreign powers. Some of them are so deeply in bed with these foreign powers and indebted that it would take centuries for them to get out of debt. And so with all of that, to say to the African diaspora to invest in Africa, our investing would only be on the surface. But in terms of having a stronghold on the continent, that would involve taking back the continent. And when I say taking back, like I said, a lot of land on the continent is owned by foreign powers. And you see what happens when you try to take that land back and give it to the people? They sanction you and they cripple your economy. And so there is no fair play going on when you're dealing with people who have had a long history of dirty dealings with the dark indigenous people of the planet. Dirty dealings. They say, okay, if you try to stand up and rise up against us, oh, we will just cripple you. We'll cripple your economy, because they know right now they have the upper hand. And this is why we say often that it's going to take divine intervention to swoop in and make the record straight. Because they already know that with the signing of a document, the flipping of a switch, the clicking of a button, that they could render you helpless. Look at Zimbabwe. Look at the continent as a whole. Okay, you have your pockets of freedom and pockets of wealth, communities within the continent that are doing quite well. But when you look at the vast majority of the people on the continent, the people that most of us care about, those are the ones who are struggling. You can't show us the good of Africa, meaning the beautiful buildings that we know were put there by these foreign powers, the infrastructure that was put in by these foreign powers. Many times they even hire their own contractors to come in and do the work because they don't want to pay the local population. And so it's really not fair to paint a halfway picture of the progress of the continent when you're trying to appeal to the diaspora, because many of us have a real and strong and genuine love for the people of the continent. But we fully expect to be dealt with genuinely. Show us and tell us the truth as to what is really happening on the continent. Because what will end up happening is you'll get a lot of people who will go there with expectations of things being one way, and they'll get there and don't think they're not going to tell how things really are, that the Asians still are running things, that Africa owes so much debt to China that is unreal. Now listen, of course we see the stories where certain African leaders are turning down loans from the Chinese. Okay, we see those stories, but get this. The other part of the story, you have to tell the full thing. They are turning down new loans, but they have existing loans in place that they still owe. And so some of these leaders are saying, you know what, we don't want to go deeper into debt, so we're not going to take this loan. Or we don't want you to build this airport. We don't want you to do that. But there have been other things that they've already signed off on, which gives these people, these Asians, these Europeans, these people from India, that gives them a stronghold on the continent. So much is not being said, and when you use one video to try to push a narrative, like even with what I'm talking about, all of this stuff you can research yourself. But when you're trying to appeal to the diaspora, because you know and you see, many of them see from across the water that many in the diaspora have reached certain financial heights. And so it would be great if those of us in the diaspora could go to the continent, bring our money and resources, talents and skills to the continent, and do the exact same thing that these other foreign powers are doing. But the problem with that is, so much has already been signed off on with these foreign nations. So much power has already been just given back to them. Okay, because they, hundreds of years ago, they went in and took everything, renamed the continent after their own names. They literally took over. They invaded and they took over, right? Now, many of the regions of Africa have been given back, or the power, should I say, have been given back to the people of Africa, but that's only on the surface, you see, because behind the scenes, it is very clear who still runs the continent, who's still pulling the strings, who puts in office or in power who they want, you see. And so those of us in the diaspora have got to be careful, because there is even the xenophobia that happens in Africa, to where you have some of the population, they look across the water and they reach across the water with love to those of us in the diaspora, and we reach back in love. But we have to use the wisdom of the Most High Yah when dealing with people who have been indoctrinated. I mean, we still see, too, the fact that there are many in Africa, should I say, on the continent, who still worship and adore and praise these European powers. They even see them as the image of God. And so with that, we've got to be careful. We can't take the awakenness of a few on the continent and apply that to everyone. Just like here in the U.S. We can't take the fact that some are awakened, have their eyes open, and apply that to all of us here in the U.S. or in the diaspora period, because here in the U.S., we as a people are terribly divided. There is no cohesion whatsoever. A lot of our people can't stand each other. They can't unify. They have this fake unity where you'll have a group of people with their clique or their faction, whether it's Christianity or Hebrew Israelites or Islam, and even having factions within these groups. Look at all of the different camps among the Hebrew Israelites. Look at all of the different denominations among the Christians. Look at all of the different affiliations among the Nation of Islam. You see, all of these factions and groups shows that there is still division. And this is so very important to know and understand, because now there's a new group, which I'm going to talk about this later too. There was one of my subscribers who shared with me a story about the rise of black atheism. There's a reason why there is all of this division, all of these different doctrinal beliefs, all of these different mindsets. There's a reason for that. And so we can't just move haphazardly from one region of the world to the other because we hear a speech that sounds so wonderful to our ears, whether it's from the president of Ghana or from the ambassador to the AU, the U.S. ambassador to the AU. I see my people get so excited when the U.S. ambassador to the AU speaks, because she speaks so eloquently. She's a beautiful woman, and she has so many visionary words that she's saying that our people get excited about these things, but they're not listening to the fine print. I know exactly what I just said there, family. They're not listening to the fine print. They're not listening to what's not being said. And so you have people with false hopes that they build up. Now, this is the month that a lot of people are claiming that there's going to be a major exodus out of the U.S. and the diaspora period, wherever we are, back to the motherland. A lot of people are saying that this is the month, and that great substance is going to be issued to the people who were dispersed to various regions of the world, being the tribe of Judah. We'll talk about that a little later, but back to the subject at hand. As I stated early on in the video, what the Chinese diaspora was able to do in building up China, making it a superpower from the outside by reinvesting their funds that they've earned and gained in the diaspora back into their country, that's quite different than what the president of Ghana is asking us. He's telling us that we can do the same thing. But again, you have to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. As I stated, the difference is China owns its region. Yeah, you may have a few foreign companies who have interest invested in China. But make no mistake, China is ran by the Chinese. But the continent of Africa is not ran by the people of Africa. Is ran by foreign powers, foreign leaders, foreign nations. And a huge majority of the land, especially the resourceful land, is owned by foreign people. When I hear stories of 10 to 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 African Americans who have gone back to Africa, that number is such a drop in the bucket when you compare it to the millions that are still remaining in the diaspora. Close to 40 million alone in the U.S. And that doesn't count the other regions of the world to where we were dispersed and left out of Africa. So, trust me, 10 or 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, that's peanuts. That's a drop in the bucket compared to those of us that are still trapped in these other lands. And so, that was also something that happened over time. But as far as a mass exodus, that hasn't taken place, family. So we have to revisit that 400-year prophecy that everyone was getting so angry at one another about because we didn't all share the same beliefs. But the proof is in the pudding as we look around, and like I said, in a few days, or in a short time, I'm not going to say a few days. I don't want to pin myself down to that because I have to make the time to do it. But at some point, Yah willing, I will revisit the subject of the 400-year prophecy because we are well past that now. According to the Enoch calendar, it was that we were past that last year. But to give those the benefit of the doubt who are still counting or looking at the Gregorian calendar, okay, we are in August 2019, which for some would mark their 400 years. And so we'll get back into that at a later time. I want to go ahead and close out this video because I just wanted to keep our people aware and awake that there's a lot of call for investment on the continent. But what I would say, and like I said, I believe it's a wonderful idea, but there are some things that need to happen first. I would like to see Africa owned, controlled, ran, operated, and non-infiltrated by foreign powers. I would like to see it, first of all, let me clarify that. I mixed some things up in that statement real quick. I want to clarify. I want to see it owned, operated, and ran by the people of the continent, the African people of the continent, and non-infiltrated by foreign powers, by Europeans. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see Asians, Indians, none of those people who have a stronghold on the continent to the point where those in the diaspora would have to compete with them. For me, that's what it would take. So, power and leadership given back to good African leaders, not puppet leaders. Good African leaders, honest African leaders, righteous African leaders. That's what I would want to see. And all of these foreign powers out of there. To me, that's what it would take, because to simply tell us to invest money in Africa, to rebuild Africa, and it's not even being ran by Africans, we are just subjecting ourselves to a whole other group of people from where we live. We're already under the leadership and the authority of the Gentiles, or the leaders that we are under. And if we simply just transfer all of that to Africa, we would just be putting ourselves in a whole different set of circumstances where we are under crooked African leaders and their crooked foreign powers. That's what it would boil down to. Now, of course, we've heard the story of those who go to the continent and they're able to live free of a lot of the Gentile rigmarole, but they face their own challenges. I thank all of you who reach out to us from the continent, who are very honest with us and tell us that things are not as they seem with the pictures that have been painted. Some of you have been very honest and showed and told us how things operate on the continent. And I really appreciate that. And I know every region is different. We're talking over 50 countries in Africa, so I know every region is different. Some regions you go to, you're going to have a better experience than you would in others. I totally get that. So it would be up to you if you wanted to move there and, just be on the continent just to say, okay, I live there. But in terms of investing there and having a stronghold or a foothold there, don't go there with that false hope, expecting to compete against foreign powers who have dominated the regions of Africa for centuries. Okay? You won't go there and get any type of equal standing with them none whatsoever. You may go there and you might live good, set up a good life for yourself. But if you're going there with the hopes and the dreams of dominating anything, you can forget that. As long as those foreign powers are there, you can forget that. One other thing I want to say before I close out this video is, I think that if you're going to ask for those in the diaspora to invest their money, why not ask for their leadership as well? And let me tell you why I say that. You've advanced or given leadership to foreign powers, or should I say they've taken it. In all fairness, they did take it, okay? Through all types of methods and tactics they've used over the centuries, they did take it. I can clearly see that. But we've also seen from across the water how African leaders have been manipulated and have become the puppets of these foreign nations. My question is, would you be willing to allow those in the diaspora who have the financial means to do some of the investing that you're talking about? Would you be willing to give them some of the positions of leadership as well? Because we have seen in recent times where foreign leaders have been given positions of leadership. We've seen where you've made chiefs in certain areas or certain villages of Africa, white men, chiefs. I think more recently there was an Asian man. And so if you're asking for investment from the diaspora, would you also be willing to give major positions of leadership? That's the question on the table for me. And for my people in the diaspora, hopefully this gives you something more to think about as we keep getting these speeches and opportunities that are presented to us from those on the continent. We want to see things from a realistic perspective and not from a slanted view or from those who may have an agenda that will suit them only and not really us so much. That is my 2 cents. With that, family, I will say shalom. Be sure to ring the bell to be notified of new uploads on this channel, and also comment, share, like, and subscribe.